Hello and welcome to Beyond Top 10 Tennis. My name is Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge and I'm your host. I am the author of 11 books. I've been a CEO for the past 12 years. I am the founder of a startup set on data privacy that looked on taking the likes of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram to LinkedIn. I am an elite performance coach of over 18 years, having worked with athletes throughout Europe, North America to Australia. And most specifically, I am the world's leading scientist on coach and athlete performance within the tennis niche that specifically uncovered how to develop a top 10 ranking. And I'll say that again. I am the world's leading authority on how to develop a top 10 tennis ranking, something that we never actually thought was possible, nor was it planned. And we let the data do the talking, set on some of the best players in the world, looking at WTA to ATP tour players, world number ones through to Grand Slam champions, and also the other side to top 100, top 500 to top 50, and we were able to uncover their differentials, which is incredibly exciting to be able to build a pathway. I am behind such theories as the optimal performance theory, the V by Dr. B to the rule of transference, having coined such terms as the barrier breaker to the golden rule. As has become custom with each episode, and we are up to episode 12 now, which is so exciting, and thank you so much for bearing with us. As promised, we have been getting better. We will get there, so thank you so much. But as has become custom is that we're looking at specific texts and really unpacking them and just sharing additional insights into them. The book we've been focusing on is The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, a comprehensive discussion on developing elite coaches and players. Today's episode is really set on athlete development, and it's such an important element because if it is looked after and given enough enthusiasm and intent throughout that developmental journey, we know you're setting those foundations to build the athlete up towards that potential top 10 ranking. So buckle in, and I really hope the takeaway here is that you get some really valuable insights, and it opens the dialogue between the player, the parent, the athlete, the coach, and everyone involved to really get down to the nitty-gritty and build that pathway and just solidify those key objectives to head towards that top 10 ranking. Thank you so much for joining us again today. And as shared is that we're looking at the secrets to optimal performance success. Now, if you'd like to follow along, we are on page 80, and we really have been making some wonderful inroads in this book. And for all of you who have shared your feedback to additional insights, thank you so much. Today's topic, it's 2.5, and it's called Athlete Development, accommodating the growing body. Now, this is such an important topic that has previously been touched on, I guess, in prior episodes, not specifically, but it really underlines everything. Because if you are not accommodating that child and or athlete throughout their growing phases, which, let's be honest, that is the phase they're going through if they are between 8, 9, 10, 15, 16, 18, 20. And to be able to accommodate that is so important. And even though we can look at the adolescent, changes that I guess aligned with those growth spurts, etc., we really have to be mindful of that 18, 19, 20-year-old athlete, is that they are still developing. Likewise to those early 20s, they are still developing, which means they are not completely, right, yet in their full adult body. I mean, look, on one side, of course they are, but on the other side, you're still putting in the work. You are still putting in, I guess, that key conditioning, and there is a specific reason, backed by science, why athletes are still filling out, so to speak, is that they're still, I guess, growing into new muscles, developing that frame, but also the skills that come with it through to increasing their speed, to agility, and so forth. Okay, let's get started. During the developmental stages of any athlete, they become susceptible to what I like to call niggles as a result of their growing body. And that's a good one, and I'll just touch on that. Niggles was a term coined by someone over the last, 20 years. It's something that I referred to growing up, which really, it takes away the associated fear with the language, which means when you use the term injury, more often than not, with any athlete, alarm bells go off, because there is no positive and or healthy connotation associated with the word. And it may be something very small, but it's also, when we're looking at that mental conditioning, quite significant. So if we're able to flip the switch, so to speak, and refer to an ailment as a niggle opposed to an injury, we almost get to draw a lighter tone around it. It's not to say to take it any more or less serious. Of course, that's the case, to be mindful of that. Though by switching that language, it again flips a switch into one more positive and not fearful. And every athlete is individual, but more often than not, when they do hear the word injury, or I guess similar connotations around that word, just that simple phrase or language to word, it really can have, I guess, that, the negative connotations around that. And if everyone within that triangular approach, so that the parent, guardian, the player, athlete, and the coach, is able to be mindful how language really does have an important role in an athlete's development, then you are setting them up for success. You are setting them up to develop optimal performance outcomes. And that's what it's all about. Because if you're building those foundations from the beginning, set on those optimal performance, I guess, parameters, you're leading the way, you're setting the pathway that we know is responsible for developing 10 plus years down the track, that top 10 ranking. And who would have thought that it starts with the dialogue, the narrative, those conversations that are shared, but also being so mindful of those words and I guess how heavy they can be with an assortment of underlying factors. Of course, this is a natural progression. However, these changes need to be accommodated, not pushed aside. More often than not, the growth spurts of young athletes are ignored. They are treated the same as before any big changes become evident, and their training is maintained and rarely modified. This is a mistake and is when injuries can occur. Now, again, this has really been, I guess, run home in previous episodes, but it's so important to give this topic more attention, or the attention it really deserves. And when we're looking at big changes, it doesn't have to be, you grew a foot taller overnight. That's not what we're talking about. It's about being mindful that throughout that an athlete's, I guess, life cycle within those growing and developmental years, which can change. It could be anywhere from, that 8 to 18 years of age. Changes happen. And it could be as subtle as vocal changes, because if you can hear that, for example, you are reminded, and it's a general recall to correspond with other changes that might not be as evident visually. You could have there's so many changes, and I'm not going to verbalize or say them, because if you're not sure, one, you would have experienced them yourself if you are that parent, guardian, and or coach, and or if you are that player or athlete, you either are about to experience them or currently are experiencing them, or some of them you already have. And the conversation is just recognizing that as humans, and again, that humanized approach that we like taking, because again, athletes, players, we are human. They are all humans. We, coach, player, parent, guardian, all humans. So it's so integral to ensure that those are, I guess, responsible, so mindful of that. Because regardless, when that player or athlete steps off the court, they're still dealing with those same, I guess, growth phases. And that's why it's so important to make those modifications. Now, there's such a clear argument out there about what modifications can be made or should I make. And it's really twofold, because on one hand, it's make sure you have that open dialogue with your athlete or player, and if you're that parent or guardian, with your child, which essentially means that you're having the conversations and you're encouraging those conversations to be had about how is your body feeling, what are you experiencing, and for them to feel comfortable enough to share. If you are that player or athlete out there, please don't be shy. All right. If you feel uncomfortable talking to your coach about this, talk to your parent and or guardian and have that discussion to begin with. And then please, for the parents or guardians, to have that conversation with the coaches to make sure they're mindful. And if you're a coach and you're not mindful, then that athlete is going to choose another coach that is mindful, because if they don't, they are going to get injured. That likelihood is so substantially high, whether you are conscious of that or not. We know that happens. The data's there. And so it is a coach's responsibility to safeguard that player in such, I guess, it's so significant to be mindful of the injuries. And look, we're not talking about a sprain, a roll. No, we're not talking about that side. We're talking about the more, I guess, severe injuries that can happen as a detriment to those techniques or the technical adjustments to the specific technical parameters not being modified, which again, I guess, pushes the discussion back to those modifications. And it could be just as simple as making sure those knees are being bent, okay? So they're not being pushed back, because it's a part of the kinetic chain. And so it's re-educating yourself about simple biomechanics and what that really means. It also means why, for example, in tennis elbow is so prominent. And it's because make sure the ball is hit in front of the player, okay? And it could be as simple also as, ouch, my wrist is hurting. Again, make sure they're not dropping their wrist too far back or extending it too far back as well. It's just being so conscious of that, because any one of those combinations, we're talking about that 6 to 8 weeks plus that they're off recovering from an injury. And if they are not honest and open or don't feel like they can share that that's what's happening, it's longer. We know that. And these are such simple examples, all right? It can happen in any way, shape, or form, irrespective of your sport and or, I guess, the stroke. Forehand, backhand, serve, all right, or volley. There are so many, I guess, differentials in there. And the modifications are just, they're so easy. And I might be, okay, hand up to say that is quite biased to say. However, it's just being conscious that one, they're growing. Two, we need to accommodate that. And as touched on in a previous episode, it's akin to someone teaching a junior a kick serve. Now, if you're teaching that, okay, if that player is not bending their knees, for example, and they're arching their back, the load placed on their spine is almost a window open for a stress fracture in the spine, okay? Which no one wants. If you are encouraging that growing athlete who's getting taller and taller and they've got some knee pains and you keep pushing them, and they're really working on their speed and agility, and especially if you're on a hard surface, that's where you see an increase in shin splints happen, and also those stress fractures within the shins and so forth. And we can modify our loads to mitigate this from happening. Sure, there are going to be cases and circumstances where it happens. However, are you following best practices? Have you been putting the correct modifications in place? Have you been having that open dialogue with the player or athlete, and for the parents or guardians, your child? Now, 90% of the time, those modifications are not made. That open dialogue is not being had. So from the other side, that's near negligence, because you are not following best practices and you are not putting that player's or athlete's health at the center, which essentially means if that 13, 14-year-old develops an injury and they're dealing with that for the next 2-3 years, the chances of them dropping off and stopping playing their sport of choice altogether are incredibly high. So high that we know more often than not that's what happens. I have, I guess, a personal experience with that. I was unfortunately getting injured quite a lot from a young age, unfortunately, which obviously has led to all of this work. Though on the flip side, the academy I was at, I was not one of the best players when I entered there. There were so many other players that were really good. But you know what? I stuck by and I stood my ground, and I just keep working hard day in, day out. And the funny thing is that every other term or semester, whichever you prefer, more athletes would drop off. Then more would drop off, then more. Until by the time I turned 17, 18, the one player at that club who was, let's call it, one of the best at the club, them and myself were the only two left. And that just goes to show the hard work that if you keep at it and at it, the rest drop like flies because of those underlying injuries. And you know what? I kept playing and putting in that hard work and going and going. And you know what? This other athlete had beaten me before, well and clear. And sooner or later, they dropped off too. And there I was, going and going and going. And I think I share that because so many athletes are mistaken that they have to achieve their best results in their younger years to get anywhere. And you know what? If you put in that training long enough and hard enough and you do not give up, the odds are in your favor. And I love telling that story as a near perfect example because they all dropped. And it's for a multitude of reasons, which goes back to something touched on previously about if you're playing the sport for the right reasons, if that discussion is there, if that motivation is there for the right reasons. Now, if you are playing tennis for someone else, it's not going to last. If you are playing it for yourself, for the love of the game and for the passion there, and you thrive on the work and you thrive on getting better and better, and you thrive on that possibility of following that pathway, the long game as we term it, towards that potential top 10 ranking, you have that in your favor, which is so important to remember, especially for those 14, 15, 16-year-olds out there listening. Put in that hard work. Sure, you have that 10 years roughly in front of you, and that also means by the time you're in your mid-20s, you are peaking towards those optimal performance outcomes, which is so incredibly rewarding. But also we know that your body and your frame is at its peak stage there and slightly later. And obviously that's not to say those in their early 20s, late teens, early 20s who are doing exceptionally well on tour. Nothing is to take away from them. They are the exception. When you have that athlete peaking very young, that is exceptional, but it also means they started earlier, more often than not. So this argument is for if you've started peaking a bit later, developmentally peaking later in your mid-teens, it means professionally you will peak slightly later too. And it's so important to be mindful of that and not say, okay, I'm 21 and my results are not there. If you are playing for the right intention, and with, I guess, that intent, give it time. Okay. It is the responsibility of the coach and athlete to establish a strong coach-athlete relationship so the athlete feels comfortable discussing any types of changes with their coach. Now, this is so important, and it obviously goes back to what's just been touched on, is having that open communication exchange, back and forth, and feeling comfortable. And in previous episodes, we've touched on it's so important to build that robust coach-athlete relationship, which essentially means that you have a wonderful rapport with your coach. Now, if you are progressing and you have that professional ranking in mind, if you want to hit top 200 in the world, head towards the top 50, and ideally towards the top 10, that relationship that you have is incredibly powerful. To make sure your mom, your dad, your guardian is in tune with that, to have that open dialogue is also just as important. However, it does not mean they have to be on the same page as you. Your coach needs to be on the same page as you. There are many differences out there where players' parents have been on the same page and others not so much. It is incredibly helpful if they are, but if they're not, it's okay. It does not mean it's the end of the road. Though the one that cannot change, the marker that is integral, is to make sure that your coach is on the right page. And this is incredibly important. And I will share another insight here as to why. Because once upon a time, again, when I was playing, unfortunately, my coach at the time was not. And I found that out indirectly by my mum telling me, because believe it or not, they went up to my coach and said, "Do you think they have the possibility of becoming a professional player?" And I kid you not, the answer was no. And I think I would have been about 15, 16 years old at that time. Now, that was, from an athlete's perspective, incredibly heartbreaking. I think I had a few more sessions with them, and even at that young age, I just realized, no, they'd been coaching me for a number of years, and I realized, no, this cannot work, because if they are not on the same page, if they are not supporting me towards my end goal, nor are they supportive of that long-term, no, that cannot happen. And the best thing that's ever happened was that I was one of 2 athletes they worked with after leaving them and working with, we'll say, other coaches that ended up excelling. And it's so sad that coaches like this are out there, but also they're still working with players and athletes with those goals, but it doesn't matter that they are not mindful of that. And so many coaches out there think that they are exceptional, they can develop a top 10 player, and they never do. And we know why, which is so incredibly profound and humbling at the same time, because it's for you listening, for the parents and players and coaches out there, it is possible. You need to stay on the same page. And there are so many coaches out there that once upon a time, maybe you had that ambition and maybe you were a professional. It doesn't matter. There is zero correlation between whether you were or you were not. It starts with that education, and it starts with the knowledge. If you do not have the knowledge of the pathway, if you are not conscious of athlete development and accommodating the growing body, no. And so many previous players and or current players were not conscious of their own development, nor were their coaches. And they begin working with athletes within that developmental stage, and they're none the wiser. Injuries keep happening, and it is cyclical. This cycle is not just in tennis, it is in countless other sports. And the gap there is with that education. And please, and this has also been touched on before, don't rely on exclusively that coach education provider, because we know here at AMA International, this research has only come to light within the last couple of years. Sure, it was founded 7 years ago, but it has taken 7 years to publish, to build together the framework, an actual tangible framework that you can take with you that guides you towards that top 10 ranking. I cannot think of anything more powerful and rewarding than that. And that's coming from that former player athlete background to that elite coaching background that's worked with countless players over the years, and thinking, what is missing? Why do they not have the tools or access to this? So we made it happen, and it is so important. Likewise with the parents who have come up to me over the years about, why is my child getting injured? Well, it comes back again to this topic. It's about athlete development, your child's development, and is the coach accommodating the growing body? Are you as a parent conscious of your child's growth phases? Are you having those conversations with them? And is that training load being modified? It is just so important if that end goal is not just becoming a professional player, but having longevity on your side. You can become a professional player and come your mid-20s, you're just wrapped in tape week in, week out. And that is not what we're talking about. Let's safeguard it. And there are so many professional players that are on one side that are regularly taped, and then you have the good ones that have been looked after, that have that knowledge and they know how to look after their body, and that throughout those developmental years, they were looked after. The correct modifications were made to, again, accommodate that growing body, to allow them to grow into their frame, to then progress, build those additional optimal performance metrics to allow them to excel towards those optimal performance outcomes. And I think that is so important to end on today, because the more we can be mindful of not only optimal performances, but to work backwards to say, how can we reach that? Now, in order to reach those optimal performances, we need to look at the athlete as a whole. We need to acknowledge the athlete's growth. And as you know, the topic of today, the athlete's development as a whole, and how are we taking that into account? What modifications have we made or are we making, and what modifications do we need to be mindful of within these next 3 to 6 months towards these next 3 to 6 years? Because it's not something that stops after those 6 to 12 months. It is something that is ongoing throughout this period of growth. Thank you so much for listening today. It is quite a substantial topic when we're talking about athlete development, because it is so important, but also personal, because it's something that I have experienced and did experience growing up. And having been so fortunate to be able to do the work that just has the solution there and can mitigate that, because a lot of my work has correlated with that mitigating injuries, which, as someone who has experienced a number of them over the years, to be able to deliver that almost to those players, the athletes, the parents, the coaches, is incredibly rewarding for everyone involved. Because if you do have those dreams, that key objective towards becoming a professional, towards potentially heading towards the top 10, establishing and securing that top 10 ranking, we know now it is possible. There's obviously a lot more involved than just athlete development, which eventually we will get there. However, we need to start at the foundation. We need to start, I guess, at that baseline here. And if we can establish the correct building blocks to begin with, we're setting ourselves up for success. And there is obviously a continued roadmap that comes into play thereafter. Okay, if you would like to get a copy of The Secrets to Optimal Performance Success, please head on over to AM8 International. That is am8international.com. For any comments or questions, please keep them coming. Head on over to AM8 International or Topic Thread. That's topicthread.com, and it's the only social network that I am on. For something different, head on over to Pink Octopus Books. That is where one of my fictional releases is, for a bit of fun. And I will leave all of the links in the bio, in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, follow, like, share. All of it is incredibly appreciated. And the more we can get these messages out there to upcoming athletes, players, coaches, to parents, then in one way or another, we are safeguarding so many against not only developing injuries, but giving them that chance towards heading towards that top 10 ranking. On that note, I am so grateful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Morgan Berge, and this is Beyond Top 10 Tennis. I'll see you next time.